So for anybody that does encounter any technical issues with Zoom at all, you can also go hop over to YouTube, and it'll also be available after the session to view. So today's webinar, it's part of World Standards Day, so happy World Standards Day to everybody. We're presenting some research we've been doing on around the future of standards. There's a piece of user research we've been doing, and we also very lucky to have special guests from the Better Regulations Executive. They're also talking about the work they're doing on standards for the fourth industrial regulations. So today's webinar, we've got myself and Grit and Marine working with me. We'll be talking about the work we're doing on future of standards, user research. And then followed by that, we've got Jim and Toby from the Better Regulations Executive. We'll be talking about standards for the fourth industrial revolution. Also to say, if you have any questions that spring up as we go, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. When you're submitting a question, if you can please also say who the question is for. Great, glad to hear from Leah that it's now gone live. So who are Connected Places Catapult? So we focus on growing businesses with innovations in mobility services and the built environment. And we're all about kind of creating new levels of physical, digital, and social connectedness. It's an agenda that's becoming even more important at the moment, is how do we connect with each other, and how do we create these new levels of connectedness? And so our role is around helping businesses, developing new businesses in this space around future of transport and mobility. So that's an introduction to the Catapult. Next slide. And World Standards Day. So today is World Standards Day. You may not have heard it before. You may be a regular celebrator of World Standards Day. You may have heard of, most people have heard of International Women's Day. We had World Mental Health Awareness Day the other day. But what World Standards Day is celebrating is the fact that it's probably a thing that happens, which many people don't realize that's going on, is that standards, there's many thousands of people that are working on developing standards and contributing voluntarily to standards development. And so it's celebrating the work of that community. And this year's theme is standards as tools for protecting the planet. So it's a really great theme. So it's so relevant with all of the challenges. And it's just around the number of ways that standards do help to protect the planet, from how you measure greenhouse gas emissions, and many other different aspects. Next slide. So we'd like to start today's webinar just to get a feeling for everyone's knowledge of standards. So we're going to do a quick poll just to kind of test the temperature, just to see. So this question is, we'll do some more of these later on. How confident are you that you know what a standard is? So we have the first poll. And okay, if we can, let's share the results. So just to answer, if anyone has not been able to see the poll, sometimes your web browser, you may not be able to see it if you're viewing using Zoom for the web browser. So the options we had were very confident, confident, slightly confident, not still confident. So yeah, so most people are fairly have reasonable level of confidence that they know what a standard is, and I think that is one of the things with standards, is that they do mean many different things to many different people. There's lots of definitions, and that is one thing that's kind of interesting that we've been looking at as part of this research. So next slide. So one piece of work that we've been doing at the Catapult is looking at, well, what is the impact of standards? What are the benefits of standards? So just to share with you some of the emerging findings we have, and that is that standards actually have an impact at all levels. They drive benefits at all levels, from a personal level, so individuals, to organizations, firms. So in terms of economics, so helping with job creation, helping address environmental issues. So with job creation, you get environmental issues that come out of it, and also with social issues, so making things safer, but it's also diffused at a national and global level. So these kind of individual and organization level benefits of improving quality, competitiveness, also flow through to a national level, and at a global level have kind of those global impacts on geopolitical strategies, global trade, global GDP, global impacts such as on climate change. So they have benefits at many different levels. Next slide. So just to kind of, before we talk about the future, for Back to the Future fans, let's go back to the future with standards. So just to give a brief history, which helps to kind of bring standards to life. What are they all about? So next. So if we, firstly, what is a standard? So this is a simple way of defining it. It's an agreed way of doing something. They define what good looks like. So next. There are also many different types of standards, so protocols, specification, business processes, guidelines, codes of practices. You know, people have many different views of what standards are, and there's a very big community of those that develop standards, from kind of formal standards to smaller communities that are creating standards for their particular areas of interest or sectors. Next. And going back in history, if you think of before standards existed, imagine that. No standards at all. So one of the first interesting examples is in the Industrial Revolution. There's a huge amount of work in industrializing processes, so using machines to create products. And the problem is that many of these machines were bespoke. They weren't large scale manufactured, and that meant if you needed a new part, often you couldn't get one. You often had to remachine things. And a chap called Joseph Whitworth, he created the world's first national screw thread standard, allowing bolts and nuts and bolts to work between different manufacturers, and going back to protecting the world with standards. So this is a great example, going back to 1841, that having standards for screws can help to repair things. And there's one quote here is that many people look at steam power as being the most important invention that set the Industrial Revolution, but actually it's quite possible that it was standardization that allowed mass production of many products and components. Next. Second example I wanted to give is linking to this manufacturing and mass production is the ability to then export these products, and vital to that is having understanding how to ship around the world, and navigation. Back in 18th century, maps and production of maps was all around sort of using longitude, latitude, and there was but the problem we had across the world, and actually in the UK we had different times. So London had a different time to Bristol and Cardiff. We didn't have a standardized time, and we also wasn't a global agreement on how you measure longitude, so how you move around the world in terms of shipping. So the Prime Meridian, which is located in Greenwich, I had a fascinating visit there, which a couple of years ago, which kind of made me realize this, was the fact that defines 0 degree longitude and the basis for our time zones, standardized time zones. Next. And moving forward in time, so the next example is around ISO shipping containers. So before, loading ships took a very long period, and the consideration was how could we make this more rapid so that you could put things on a ship, take it off, go on a train, on a lorry. So the ISO shipping container was established, and that saw a huge rapid expansion of global trade. So the ISO shipping container, that's another well referenced example of how standards support trade. So 95% of the world's freight using ISO shipping containers. Next. And the next big kind of standards movement that had a huge impact on the world is that initiated by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN in 1989, and the World Wide Web. So the amount of innovation that came out of the development of community-driven internet standards and how rapid the innovation was following that through the Internet Engineering Task Force and the World Wide Web Consortium. It was first documented later in 1997, and we see the huge amount of innovation there. Next. And then one we're probably all familiar with, maybe a fun one. So Unicode. So this is amazing in that it provides a common agreement how to send language, characters, emojis, and programming code between smartphones. More than 90 languages. Before it was really problematic in terms of sending messages between different languages. So the Unicode provides this unified approach to allow everyone to talk. So connectivity between everyone has been enabled by Unicode, and these are some of the new emojis that they're releasing. Next. And so thinking about the future of standards, well, there's a huge amount of innovation, and the fourth industrial revolution is kind of this next stage. So we had the digital revolution, which is seen a huge amount through the 90s and the last couple of decades in IT transformation of organizations. The fourth industrial revolution is looking at how technologies starting to blur the lines between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. There's huge opportunities for this. There's also potential perils. And so how do we manage this? How do we sustain these technologies that they are for the greater good? They are protecting the planet and addressing social and economic issues. So standards are very key to the fourth industrial revolution. This is a quote from the World Economic Forum. Next. So it's thinking about what is the future of standards and how do they support the fourth industrial revolution. Pleased to say Toby and Jim will, a bit of a segue, they'll be talking about work that Better Regulations Executive are doing, looking at how standards can support the fourth industrial revolution. They work with partners as part of the UK's national quality infrastructure. But we want to share what we're looking at and our perspectives, how we're looking at what is the future for standards and some of the futures. So next. So the project we're doing, Future of Standards, we are looking to understand the experience of the catapult. Actually, what is the experience of our own staff? So if we want to promote standards, how do we support our own organization in using standards? Secondly, we want to understand the challenges that people, businesses, government, and organizations in the built environment and mobility are facing with standards. So that is our focus. We're not trying to bore the entire ocean. We are very much within the built environment and mobility sectors, but we're trying to see how we can support the sectors that we work within in the use of standards, ensuring addressing their challenges, and then looking at some potential futures for standards. So how can we address some of these challenges, and how do we work with different organizations in order to do that? Next. So this is the team that's working on the project. So we're a multidisciplinary team from working on standards. We have service designers. So Grit and Marine will be talking, will be up next. They'll be handing it to Grit shortly. Chris, who is our economist, Agnes, project manager, and Erin is our built environment director, and Ashling, insights lead. Next. And what this is all about, so we've set a clear ambition as part of the Catapult strategy. We, what we're doing is we're championing the use and creation of standards which will allow interoperability and scaling of innovation. So this is what we believe in. So standards are vital if we want innovations to scale. For those to work in, a phrase we've always used is one city is not a market. So how can we get these innovations to work in every place? Next. And in championing standards, well, there's a problem. How do we get standards to be widely adopted? And we've heard from the market there are a number of challenges in understanding what is the value of standards, what do they actually mean, what standards should I actually be using, how do I use them, how do I take part in their development, and all these challenges are resulting in some fragmented adoption. So we've kind of turned this on its head, turning a problem into an opportunity in terms of how could we allow the market to more easily find the standards, use standards, and take part in their development to support a more accessible standards and also help scale adoption. So what can we do to address these challenges? So that's the topic of the research. And there's two kind of components to champion standards. One is addressing market barriers, understanding the challenges the market faces with using standards and what interventions there may be to support adoption. That may be things that the Catapult does to help with the SMEs and the businesses we work with. It could be things we work on with other stakeholders as well. Also, for us to demonstrate the value of standards. So us using standards at the Catapult ourselves, so we can then demonstrate their value to the market. So that's a thing that we think is really important. Next. And one example of what we're doing to experiment around how we can make standards easier for people to find and use. This is a project that we did last year as part of Synchronicity. It was an EU-funded Horizon 2020 project. And towards the end of the project, one of the things we heard from the cities that were involved in the Synchronicity pilot, which was a large-scale IoT pilot, was that many cities just don't know what standards to use, where to start, where to look, which ones are relevant to them. So we developed this prototype called the City Standards Library. It's a prototype we developed with our partners at Open Agile Smart Cities, who are a network of 150 plus smart cities around the world. Next. And here's the user experience. This is the user interface. So what we did is we looked at how could we better structure sort of standards to make it easier for people to identify standards that are relevant to them. At the moment, you've got multiple different standards organizations that provide standards, and they cut across many different domains. So for smart cities, knowing the standards that are relevant to them. So what we did is we created a category tree of different standards to cluster them in key themes that were most important to cities. So from the public realm to mobility, in the Internet of Things, health, smart city governance. So what this does is it aggregates kind of standards from many different organizations. So you can find all those that are relevant to smart cities. Next slide. So looking at one example. So for example, the Internet of Things. So if you go into the Internet of Things, there are then multiple tags. So you can look at aspects of IoT that you may be interested. So if you're interested in terminology or smart manufacturing or authentication, privacy, then that will show you the standards from the different standards organizations. And then if you want to then look at a specific standard, you can then click on that and it will take you to a link for that particular standards organization. So yeah, so we have buildings is one area. And yeah, so these are kind of the different categories. Next, we also have environment is another category. So you can have a look at different elements of protecting the environment, such as what helps you with sustainable development goals, water consumption. And next, and then if you click on a specific standard, so for example, under the category of buildings, we have the well building standards. So this is very relevant to now. So how to make your building have better well-being performance. So how to address issues of comforts and air quality and water, and then you can click through to see the standards. So this is a prototype for us to have a look at how we may make easier for standards to access. We developed with our partners at OSC. It will be going live very soon so that others can have a look at it and use it. We're also keen to explore any others that may be interested in it's a future development. So happy to take questions through the Q&A on this later. Right. Next. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Grit now to introduce you to how we're our approach to the project.
Hello, hope everyone can hear me. It's excellent to have this introduction, and like Gavin introduced, looking at also prototyping some aspects really throws up a number of other questions that we're going to dive into. So we'll really in the discovery phase to really understand what is behind some of the issues coming up. And what we're doing is really looking from different angles and looking and listening to different stakeholders, the needs, the user needs, and really understanding the current landscape through prototyping. The example that Gavin just showed is one angle that provides insights. So on prototype, it's always good to have feedback, so incorporating feedback loops, but firstly, really being very clear what the pain points are, what the opportunities are. And we're doing this through like running surveys and interviews. This is internally with staff, as Gavin mentioned, as well as like looking what is out there already and what we can learn from. If we look further to the next slide, please. This is just a rough overview, like what I've been describing. The key essential part is of this iterative process is really constantly listening and learning from that, and how we also document and share observations. And one part is really also this event is one part of how we share and engage. Others is you might have seen some parts on like either our website or social media channels. Through that, we also gather insights and conversations and trying to pick up from that. This essentially goes into a synthesis and analysis, and this is a repeated circle that throughout the process, we really try to gain better understanding and try to iterate and update and develop. If we go to the next slide, we have an overview of like what discovery phase really means. So in this stage, we're really gathering a number of data. So it might look a little bit messy, and some of you might know this squiddle because it's been around for quite some time. It still really represents a nice way of really looking at like how do we then formulate this in really more concrete hypothesis. And we will share some initial preview of insights a bit later on. If we move to the next slide, we kind of, this is a brief overview what we've done so far. So really learning from past projects. Gavin mentioned one, there is a few others that we have a few insights that we're going to share here as well. And this is a key part of like building from, and one angle that really informs how we build and try to understand insights or what we would prototype or develop further on. Also really reviewing what is out there already. So there are some incredible publications, and I believe we have some also in the audience today. So this is really how do we build on existing knowledge already and really understand, and how do we bring this together. The internal staff survey is really looking where we are here at CPC and how we start within CPC environment to really empower people from different directorates, different teams, because by their nature, there's a different understanding and almost like a different level of exposure to standards and what it is. And then we have interviewed 10 members of staff based on a survey that we're going to show later on as well. And this is really a cross-section of different backgrounds as well as different confidence levels. So really to map out a wide spectrum. And we also started conducting external interviews, and this is ongoing. And this really helps us to dig a little bit deeper to understand like the underlying patterns or reasons. If we move to the next slide, please. Yes, I'm going to hand over to Marijn, and he will talk to you about what we've learned about standards from past projects.
Yeah, thank you, Grit, and hi, everyone. So apart from the user research that we're currently doing, as Grit has mentioned before, we're also kind of basing our knowledge on past projects that we've done in the Catapult. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give you a quick idea of really some examples of projects that we've done and some insights that we gained from that. Now, the first example is actually synchronicity. So as Gavin before presented kind of the working prototype that we have of the standards library, that was a part of this project, Horizon 2020 project around IoT. No, and some of the things that we see in there where standards are essentially a key part of this project, now ensuring interoperability. But that really standards are often kind of this short-term pain to actually get that long-term gain, no? Which in this case is interoperability as one of the key things. Now this kind of constant battle that standards sometimes are seen as kind of these barriers that constrain you, know that sometimes make it more difficult to see kind of what a big impact they could have, no, on the longer term. And then that's reflected now also by some other things that we've heard in other projects, such as people being interested in the fish, but not really thinking that much about how could we incentivize people to also invest in the pond. And now there's this barrier in terms of time and thus resource as well, to develop standards in the first place. So it requires a little bit of surpassing those barriers to really get to the real benefits. Next, please. So this investment that kind of good standards or good developed standards require. Now you can really see that in terms of piloting, that could testing out protocols to ensure that they work. For all these different cases is one of the things that you could do to achieve that. Working with both demand and supply side to clearly articulate also the value propositions, especially for people that might not be involved as much in the real technical details of the application of standards. And then also like the documentation that's behind standards, especially around implementation, for example. Next, please. One other project that we've recently worked on is a discovery project into building safety standards and kind of the storage. Now, how do you actually store building safety information? Where standards are really essential because there's many different stakeholders involved in kind of accessing the safety information of a building, ranging from the people that design buildings, architects, to the people that help constructing buildings, to eventually the people that might use that building, so actually live in that building. So there's so much potential for standards in this context to actually improve the usability of how we call it, of that building safety information. So really being able to access it, being able to understand it, being able to kind of act upon that. However, we also came across that because there's all these many different kinds of stakeholders involved, it's not always easy for everyone to kind of understand the standards themselves, for example, so the documentation behind it, the technical jargon that's sometimes involved. And that also sometimes, especially, for example, from a point of view of industry, that standards might not always necessarily are really easy for them to keep up with the innovation that's constantly occurring in the market itself. Next, please. And another thing being the digitalization also of the standards themselves. So there's lots of PDF documents, which is not necessarily machine readable, for example, or it also provides kind of a challenge to actually extract those requirements to track compliance in real time and applications like that. Also, before I hand over back again to Gavin, I would like to remind everyone that if you have questions during any point of the webinar, please use the Q&A section. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have time to answer all questions. But feel free to put your questions there at any point.
Thank you, Marijn. The next kind of topic is we're going to just give you a bit of insight into the work we've been doing to see what the experience is of staff at the Catapult and in terms of using standards and to get some insights. And we're also going to kind of do a couple of polls to kind of understand the audience's experiences of standards. So we've been working across the staff at the Catapult. We are a multidisciplinary team working across directorates, some with very high degree levels of confidence in standards, have developed standards and worked with them relentlessly in some cases. Others don't use standards, are very new to them, and also across many different sectors as well. So from working in our compliance teams, look at how we manage personal data, to our data science team, our new mobility technologies team, our applied technology team, built environment. So working across this all these teams to understand experiences. Next. So this was a how when we asked our staff what they said, how confident are you that you know what a standard is. So we asked obviously everyone in the audience today. And most people say that they feel quite confident they know what a standard is. So 41 out of 52 that answered the question said they were confident. But when we kind of examined these answers in more depth, there were multiple kind of things that people thought of as standards, from international standards published by formal standards bodies, even down to kind of local agreements on ways of working. So people interpret this in many different ways. Actually, having internal standards for your own business is also really important, how you do things internally, as well as to the macro kind of level of international standards. Next. So our kind of next poll that we'd like to ask everybody, we also did this internally, so we share what our staff said. So what is your experience of standards? So the options we have are great. I find them really useful. Interesting. I know they're important, but I haven't really used them consciously. Confusing. I find standards cryptic, overwhelming, and tend to switch off when someone talks about them. I've been there when I've talking to people. Confusing. Yes, or all of the above. Okay, so we'll end the poll now. So yeah, the majority say great. I find them useful. It's interesting because it depends whether we have more people interested in standards that have joined this webinar anyway. But that's a really interesting insight that yeah, 48% thought they were useful. 17% said they're interesting. I've not really used. I know they're important, but haven't really used them consciously. 7% said that 2 people find them cryptic, a bit overwhelming. And actually 28% said all of the above. So, and I think sometimes it depends on the experience. So sometimes can be great, but also confusing. So yeah, really interesting insights. Okay. Next, so this is what we had at staff at the Catapult. So most people thought they're important, thought they're enabling. We had a few other options in descriptions in there as well to hear people's thoughts. So some people thought they were difficult. Some people thought they were a bit boring, and also some other options. But yeah, on the whole, people thought they were very kind of enabling, really important. So the purpose of this is then kind of exploring. So once we know, the next kind of stage as part of our user research interviews is why do people think they're important, or why do people say that they think they're boring, and exploring that further. Next. So the next poll we'd like to do is, how often do you use standards in your work? So the options are, how often do you use standards in your work? Always, often, rarely, never, or I don't know. And I think the don't know answer is an interesting one, because sometimes people use standards unconsciously. So they may have used them without actually realizing. Okay, we'll just wait for a few more votes, and then I'll share the poll. Okay. So here's the results. So often, so 45% have said they often use standards. 28% said always. Some say yeah, rarely or never. And I guess it very much depends on your role and what work you're doing, and also your understanding of how you can use standards themselves. So next. So this is what we heard back from people internally at the Catapult. So yeah, people, many people that are using them often. So we have some what we call super users of standards. So two that use them always, and many that use them often. Sometimes they're just referring to them. They may not be using them going through every line of a standard. Some people though, so we had 11 that say they rarely, 2 that never. So one is, so that's really informed us. So what we've been doing, that's informed who we need to talk to. So we wanted to speak to a mixture of those that love standards, use them all the time, and also those that never use them or rarely use them. Find out why not. Why don't you use them? What's the barriers? What stops you? So that's kind of the purpose of us doing this. So that's helped us kind of inform who we're talking to. Next. And so who we're talking to, so just to give an overview of this, so just on to the next slide. So we've got 2 different groups. So internally, we're serving our staff, so 10 people across directorates. So looking at both super users and non-users. We're also extending this research externally as well. So through kind of our own networks, experts, and recommendations. Also through, we've got a survey live, which we'll share the link to later. But it's people from across different domains and different sectors to get different experiences. So these are some of the different kind of domains and stakeholders we're talking to. So SMEs and organizations that work within artificial intelligence and IoT, and architects, those work in mobility, innovation, but also talking to governments, so those working on digital services within local governments, central governments. I've also been engaging with the standards community as well, so to get a really kind of broad insight. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Marijn now, who's going to share some preview, some emerging insights.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. So these are kind of a first go at some insights that we got from the internal interviews and ongoing research. So again, it's just a preview. One of the things that we found, and actually not some of the things that we've heard mentioning before as well, definitely not for all people. No, there's loads of people that really don't find standards confusing. No, especially those people that often work with standards and or so-called super users, as Gavin mentioned. But also for some people, standards are considered to be sometimes confusing and sometimes complex to understand. And we think that is because of their often technical nature or the use of language. And in that sense, it has a potential to exclude some people from potentially using them. People that might not be as familiar, have as much experience as others. There's, as an example, there's some acronyms often, or terms that you don't know, and it's not necessarily always explained, for example, in the documentation. So there's quite often quite a bit of investment required to enable to understand the standard, and then also actually to use it. Often requiring kind of the consultation of experts, for example, or things like that. And then also the intent behind some specific requirements are sometimes not explained, which often could help also with understanding why certain things are part of a standard. Next one, please. Now, so everybody kind of really recognizes the value of standards, but few people understand the actual standards themselves, and then even fewer people than that use them and apply them. Next, please. Another insight that we got is kind of like choosing or selecting the right standards is sometimes a challenge. So it's quite hard to judge from just the title of a standard if it's relevant or not, or just from a initial kind of description. Obviously, if you know the people that are involved with the development of standards, or if you trust kind of the context where that standard lives in, or you know people that you trust as well that use them, that could definitely help to also understand if that standard is the right one for you or not. But much of this kind of knowledge is quite difficult to accumulate without any experience. So let's say, for example, small companies or companies that are kind of new to the sector, startups. It requires a lot of investment, just in terms of time already and resourcing, that they often might not have, or might have very limited time of. And yeah, I mean, there's a need for gaining consensus also on what standards actually work. We feel that, for example, it could also be better information on what a standard is for and the potential impact of a standard if you apply them. The right filtering, and also the ability to just kind of share those learnings. Not that you have any organization that have used a standard, any individual have used a standard. It would be great kind of to have more sharing about their experience and kind of the things they learned along the way for those other people that might need it. Next, please. So overly zealous standards within government on processes that were designed for multi-million projects applied to small research projects could potentially also stifle innovation creativity. That's just an example quote that illustrates that. Next, please. So I'll hand over the word actually to Grit, who will tell you a little bit more about the benefits of standards.
Thanks, Marijn. So if we look at the benefits, besides the pain points, we can definitely see, and this has come up before as well, that to ensure that we can actually understand each other and that we can exchange knowledge. So really effectively sharing information, sharing insight, sharing knowledge is one of the key parts. And one part is to really agree on the goals and what this kind of language is. And the examples that Gavin have been shown is excellent. That ranges from like a code to icons, etc. So another part really where it is clearly beneficial, that also comes across from examples that we've seen, is really assuring the quality. And one key part of building upon a knowledge that has been accumulated from expertise across different areas. So really avoiding reinventing the wheels, or another way to say is standing on the shoulders of giants. So this really helps and is a huge benefit. If we move to the next slide, please. We have a quote, and this is a really good one. Standards are there to help us guide individuals, projects, and as an organization to ensure we do stuff the right way. If we move to the next slide. Another key benefit to highlight from our initial preview is that it really does streamline ways of working, so it makes things more accessible. And we've seen with project examples already references that actually enable interoperability and scalability, and this needs to be understood within technology that is emerging, that is in the physical, the digital, or the biological. And we hear later on from more about the fourth industrial revolution, but this is a huge part. And also, if we have templates, principles, we have clear starting points that enable building projects. If we move to the next one, please. There's another quote that actually the GDS design principles and MHCLG local digital declaration is an example that has been helpful on projects for Eastbourne, where we're looking at helping the council to rethink their customer service journey. Really looking at how standards. Oh, I'm actually handing over back to Gavin now.
So, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Grit.
Yes.
So I guess just kind of reflecting what this is all about. Is thinking about how we can understand the benefits of standards, communicate those to others, as well as addressing the pain points so more can benefit from standards. And it's thinking about this overall aim is around how can standards benefit greater value creation and expand creativity, and how that can then be a starting point and a springboard for sustainable growth. And it's so important at the moment in terms of stimulating these kind of new innovations and new opportunities, and having tools like standards can kind of help with that. So just to wrap things up and summarize our next steps before we hand over to our next speaker. So this is what we're doing next. So for the rest of October, obviously we're at the show and tell now. We're doing further synthesis of the findings from surveys and user research interviews. We'll be continuing to do user research interviews of external stakeholders. Once we've got all those that data together, create some insights, group those insights into kind of key themes. So we've got a couple of emerging around understanding standards and knowing which standards to use. We'll be then kind of exploring some what we call how might we statements. So how might we make standards more user-friendly, and looking at some ideas. So ideation sessions. So we'll be doing roundtables and inviting others to take part in developing some of these ideas. What might work. Users will be at the center of that. So what would work for users. Coming up with a set of recommendations and design principles for addressing some user challenges. We've also got our impact assessment process going on throughout this to quantify the impact of standards and quantify some of the potential impacts of interventions. And then we'll be publishing these findings. So we're looking to do another one of these sessions later in the year, another show and tell. We'll be publishing these and then working with different stakeholders on how we can work together on the next steps. So that's kind of our plan. Next. I'd also like to promote the survey we have. So we will be sending after this event. Will be everyone will get an email with a link to the content and also to the survey. But you can also use this QR code if you fancy taking the survey, and we have a link here. We're very much open to talking to others as well. So if you want to reach out to us to talk about the project further, here are our contact details for myself and my colleague Sajid. So yeah, please do take our survey to tell us your thoughts on standards, feed into the research. But now I'm going to kind of our next slide. So next we're going to kind of hand over to our guest speakers. So I'm really excited to have Jim and Toby from the Better Regulations Executive to talk about their work.
Yeah, hi Kevin. Hope everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm Jim Foodie, the Deputy Director of Better Regulation Executive. Before my colleague Toby takes us through the work we've been doing on standards for the fourth industrial revolution, I just wanted to give you maybe a couple of very quick summary points of the Better Regulation itself, Better Regulation Executive, I should say. Excuse me. The BRE, we have responsibility for policy on better regulation across government. That's our key focus and our key role. And we do this in three main areas of activity, one of which is unleashing innovation. And I think that the presentation that Toby will give will show you the links as to how we've made that the key focus for the work we've been doing around standards with colleagues in the Office for Product Safety and Standards and other external bodies that Toby will no doubt highlight. We know in the Better Regulation Executive that regulations have such a huge impact on the ability of businesses to innovate and to enable innovation. It's important that protections and security for investors and consumers are correctly balanced. And we try to achieve that balance by having flexibility within the regulatory regime. And if you like, approaching a regulation with an agile approach so that responses can be made to new opportunities that arise within the market. So there are various mechanisms that we use to promote innovation and to not only just talk about and think about innovation in a theoretical manner, but to actually see real outcomes happen. So I would say that the first of these, some of these you may be familiar with, others you may not be. So I hope they're of interest. The first would be the recently established Regulatory Horizons Council, which is an independent body recently set up, which has a number of industry and academic experts literally scanning the horizon to see what technological developments and innovations are on the market, and then for them to take some deep dives into specific areas such as medical devices to see exactly how they can advise government on how the regulatory framework needs to respond to those innovations to enable those innovations to come to market and to be commercialized, so that the benefit of them can be fully felt in wider society and by the business community. Another route through which we promote innovation is the Regulators Pioneer Fund. We've worked with regulators over the past couple of years, had around 10 million from Treasury. We took forward 14 separate projects with a number of regulators, including the Care Quality Commission, the MHRA, the Civil Aviation Authority, the Solicitors Regulation Authority. And they've developed a number of innovative ideas during the past 18 months or so by using the funding that we provided to them. And they would include things such as the development and use of sandboxes, the use and development of artificial intelligence tools to improve home care, for example. That's one of the projects that the Care Quality Commission has taken through. The SRA, the Solicitors Regulators Authority, have developed ideas on how to make legal advice more accessible to small, medium enterprises and to members of the public that find it difficult to access what can be often expensive legal advice. So these are just some examples of digital projects that have been taken forward, or the use of tech being implemented in order to improve processes, to provide better access to services, and to do future-proof them, if you like, for the new world as it emerges under the fourth industrial revolution. We also are developing currently some digital projects to help businesses navigate the regulatory areas. It can be very difficult for businesses sometimes to understand which regulations apply to them and to understand them better. And then another area that I just want to highlight very quickly is our work on the international side of things, where we look to work with other countries in partnership to talk about the international frameworks and to remove tariff barriers where possible. We also have responsibility in the BRE for the policy framework as a whole, and we drive transparency and develop policy based on evidence. So we work with the Regulatory Policy Committee who scrutinise impact assessments of policy development from other government departments. That allows public transparency around decision making and the impacts of policy thinking to come to the fore before they're implemented into legislation. And then the third area that I wanted to highlight was our influencing across government and with regulators. So we work collaboratively and in a consultative capacity with other government departments on policy and with analysts to ensure that we have the relevant evidence available to take forward policy ideas and recommendations. The work that we've done with regulators has been particularly interesting over the past 18 months or so. As I mentioned, the Regulators Pioneer Fund, we've also set up a Regulators Innovators Network where they can develop their ideas and share best practice and work together outside of those meetings to develop their thinking on how their organisations can be more innovative and how they can respond to those that are developing innovative ideas and suggestions. I think that's a very high level of what we do in BRE. I won't labour the point now because the key thing is to hear what we've been doing on standards. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Toby, who will talk you through that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. Good morning, all, and happy World Standards Day, everyone. I hope everyone can see and hear me. If I don't hear otherwise through the chat, or if somebody shouts at me, I'm assuming that's the case. So first of all, I want to echo Jim's thank you to the Connected Places Catapult for organising the event today, but also on a more broader level, kind of the work they've been doing on standards, which we've been hearing about earlier today. I think it's really, well, being kind of separate from the work that we're doing in the Better Regulation Executive, I can really see how that helps to tease out some of the issues that users see with standards, the benefits, and what could potentially be changed in the future. And I think as such, there are a few commonalities in terms of the themes that both of our projects look at. So what I just wanted to do now is quickly run you through our work on standards, which we're conducting in collaboration with, as Jim was saying, colleagues in the Office for Product Safety and Standards, which is also part of BASE, and the organisations that collectively build the UK's national quality infrastructure, so British Standards Institution, the National Physical Laboratory, and the UK Accreditation Service. And maybe just as a bit of a disclaimer up front to clarify what we're talking about, because as we've already heard, standards can mean very different things to different people. So people might think about things like the Red Tractor scheme or the work that's being done by the Food Standards Agency or IFRS, which is essentially a non-for-profit organisation developing international financial reporting standards. So very different things. And I think we've also often heard a slight degree of conflation between the world of regulation and the world of standards, where we talk about regulatory standards, but what we really mean is minimum requirements set out in legislation. So I think it's just kind of from our perspective helpful to set out that in our work, when we talk about standards, we think about them as a technical document that is used as a rule, a guideline, or a definition, and that it's consensus built, repeatable way of doing something developed by bringing together all interested parties. So I think very similar in the way that it was framed earlier in the presentation that Gavin and his team gave us, but with a really clear focus that we're really talking about the kind of standards that are being developed and managed by the BSI in the UK, and kind of not looking at any other standards that might be developed by more industry-specific consortia and organizations. So that's just kind of on the scope of our work. And I think they're very good reasons for government to be interested in the role of standards and how it can support innovation. And that is reflected in the white paper that Jim has mentioned earlier on, so the white paper on regulation for the fourth industrial revolution, that recognized the role of standards and has invited the NQI partners to set out their future vision for standards. The interest that we take also reflects the assumption that any strong and longer-term economic recovery from the current COVID-inflicted crisis will really heavily depend on the performance of innovative and high-value add sectors, and that standards can really play an important role in supporting that through diffusion of knowledge and commercialization of new technologies throughout the economy. And last but not least, the final kind of piece of context to provide is the UK's R&D roadmap, which has been recently published, in which puts a really strong emphasis on the systems and institutions that are needed to secure the economic and social benefits from research. And I think that, again, is something where standards can play a really important role to facilitate the successful commercialization of R&D. So given that from a user perspective, standards are often seen as part of a wider system along with measurement, accreditation and conformity assessment, as well as market surveillance. We kind of reflect that approach in our work, and we look at this in a systematic way. So that is why we have collaborated with these different organizations covering off the different bits of the system. I mentioned them up front, the BSI, NPL, UCAS and OPSS. So why are standards important, and why should we think of them as part of a wider innovation ecosystem alongside regulation? So I think the first point to mention is that as a process, standardization itself can help leverage network effects and bring different communities of innovators together and help them establish a common language and a common understanding of issues around new technology. So looking at network effects. The second one, by the way of codifying an agreed way of doing something, standards can also act as an important means of knowledge transfer, so that then later on facilitates the widespread adoption and deployment of emerging tech based on interoperability across different sectors of the economy. And in interplay with measurement and accredited certification, standards can also underpin a wider system that can generate trust, and that trust throughout the supply chain and with consumers is particularly important in the context of novel and complex technologies and can help drive investment. And obviously, last but not least, the engagement in international standardization processes can also help project UK thought leadership and help us protect the interests of UK consumers and businesses by shaping common rules that kind of apply on a global level. So that is the idea how kind of standards can support the process from brilliant ideas to commercial success. And I think that this slide just really illustrates how different standards can play an important role at different points throughout the innovation process. So for instance, at the beginning, at the early stages when technology is still at the basic research stage, standards could be about agreeing a common vocabulary, as has been the case with the work that BSI has done in the context of the CCAF program. As the technology development progresses further, standards would reflect that and set out specific product and service specifications. And further down the line, standards can also help reflect the emerging stakeholder or consumer view in support of best practice. And these are all reasons why there's a need to take standards into account in technology road mapping and foresight exercises. But obviously, as we've already heard this morning, there are also certain challenges around standards that can hinder the most effective use of them in support of innovation. I think the first one to mention is the development of standards and agreement by consensus obviously in itself can be a time-intensive process and may delay the availability of the right type of standards at the right point in the innovation process. Another challenge is openness. So while obviously the formal world of standards, the process is usually assumed to be open by principle for anyone who's interested to participate. Obviously, innovators and smaller or micro businesses may struggle to sustain the effective participation in these processes, because obviously that is a time and resource commitment that they would need to take on. And finally, existing standards can also bear the risk of inadvertently locking in specific technological solutions that can then sort of prevent the swift deployment of new technologies across sectors. So recognizing these different challenges, the white paper on regulation for the fourth industrial revolution invited the NQI partners last year to reflect on these. And following a very helpful initial response from BSI, NPL, and UCAS last year, we from the Better Regulation Executive, working together with OPSS, have engaged in a collaborative working arrangement with these organizations to set out a common vision and develop a joint action plan to unlock the potential of standards to support innovation. And we're now at a stage where we've concluded a series of workshops in which we've explored different ideas and tossed around thinking. And we're now in a place where we're converting these insights, translating them into a list of tangible actions that we hope will bring about a step change, also in terms of the experience for users in the wider innovation community. And I think these will broadly fall into two different categories, as you can see on the slide. The first one is really about making sure that the tools and processes for standards, measurement, and accreditation rise to the challenges posed by fast-paced technological changes. So here we're thinking about a new and more agile way of producing standards, specifically in innovative areas where there is need to make faster and quicker progress. And that would essentially provide faster development times, more frequent iteration and testing with stakeholders, and an easier feedback mechanism. Obviously, as we've heard earlier, there's also a big interest in the digital transformation. So obviously, both standards and measurement outputs can provide the appropriate infrastructure for the development of the wider digital transformation across the economy. But there's also a big potential in transforming the processes in these organizations and the outputs in a way that really unlock the value of digital, including the use of digital standards, so machine readable standards, remote assessments, use of AI, to make sure that these become more relevant for industries of the future. And last but not least, on that side of the things that we're looking at is also exploring ways by which we can increase the stakeholder diversity and inclusion. So making sure that the standard setting process actively draws in the relevant stakeholders, including innovators, to ensure that they have access into the process and access to the market for non-incumbents. So that is kind of looking at how the NQI, so standardization, measurement, and accreditation, will evolve. But also the other area that we're looking at as part of our action plan is to establish the mechanisms that will ensure that there's effective collaboration and join between the national quality infrastructure and government and research organizations. And we are looking to do that by raising the profile of the NQI in policy making. So that could be done through establishing a sort of standards network across government, looking to provide training material or training courses for civil servants to raise the awareness around the usefulness of the NQI as a tool for public policy. The second one is about embedding the consideration of NQI outputs in the context of strategic research programs, particularly those that are being delivered through Innovate UK, where I think there's big potential to embed that thinking early on in the process rather than having it as an add-on at the end of it. And last but not least, it's also about establishing effective mechanisms to ensure that the NQR's international engagement, which is very impressive, I think, through different bilateral and multilateral relationships they're having, to align that better with HMG strategic priorities internationally. So, as I was saying, we're currently at a stage where we're pulling together our action plan, and I think I'm just using this as a shameful call for action. We're really keen to engage with people in the audience who take an interest in standards in a few weeks' time, where we're looking to test our joint action plan with stakeholders, including through roundtable events, and in particular to have your thoughts on what needs to be done for standardization and the wider NQI to better engage with a community of innovators and smaller companies. And then our aim is to publish an action plan together with our NQI partners in the first quarter of 2021. So many thanks for your attention. And as I was saying, if you're interested in being engaged further down the line and provide views on our joint action plan, please let us know. You see my email address on the slide, and I think we're also going to distribute this slide deck. So do feel free to contact us so we can get back to you at the relevant point in time. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Toby and Jim. That was super interesting to hear about the work you're doing. And when we first spoke, I remember being excited about how we were both kind of looking at this similar issue. So it's great for us to kind of work together and feed in. We've got around 20, just shy of 20 minutes now for Q&A. If you can please post any further questions you have using the button down the bottom, and then we'll go through these questions. Reminder, please post who the question is intended for. Okay, so we'll make a start on some of these questions. So there's one question that we've already answered. So some of these we may answer live. And do forgive me if sometimes we may paraphrase some questions. And also, if I can ask all the panelists to have their cameras on for when answering questions. So a question we've answered already. So can I take the survey if I'm not an expert of standards? Actually, yes, we would rather, we welcome experts on standards to answer the question. Actually, we would love to have people that are not experts, because that's entirely who we're trying to partly reach, is those that maybe finding out why they don't use standards and kind of how we can support that. So that's kind of a question that we've answered. So yes, please, we'd like to hear from everyone, no matter what your knowledge is, experts, non-experts, everything in between, everyone's welcome. So just to go through some of the questions, the first question, I think, which was intended at CPC around the standards tool. So this tool is a prototype, and it will be available live very, very soon. But yes, it's not. We will be able to kind of share that with people afterwards. So yes, that will be available, and it's a prototype that we're hoping to continue working on. So next question I'm going to go to from anonymous attendees. So how are the views? Okay, so this is one for Toby and Jim. So how are the views of consumers on the regulation of technologies addressed? What is BRE's role in listening to the views of consumers? Very interesting.
Yeah. Give Jim a chance to have a first go at this if he wanted, but happy to share my perspective on that. So I think it's probably worth clarifying that obviously the role of BRE is kind of very much cross-cutting across different areas of regulation and promoting best practice. So I think obviously it is up to the relevant policy team who's kind of overseeing a particular piece of regulation on emerging technology, to make sure that in the engagement that they take the relevant views of stakeholders and consumers on board. But I do know that, for example, a very strong focus of the Regulatory Horizons Council that Jim has already been mentioning, which has recently started its work, is really on engagement with stakeholders. Obviously, that is then fed into a process that develops some independent expert advice to government that is being fed to policy teams, opportunities for regulatory reform. So it's surely reflected in there, but obviously it is then up to individual teams across government to consider these and take these views into account. I don't know, Jim, if there's anything else that you might want to add to this.
Yeah, I think that's right, Toby. I think there isn't a specific direct route for BRE, as it were, but it is a matter of, I mentioned earlier, one of the key things for us is about working across government and with other government departments. And so taking in the views that are expressed via those particular departments as they develop policy, we're able to pick up on public views that come via them into the policy making decision process. But there's no specific direct route for BRE within that exchange.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting because, yeah, I mean, there are many regulators out there. So, yeah, it's very interesting to hear. Thank you. Our next question is, are there communication and dissemination initiatives or tools for SMEs companies to foster confidence, trust, and increase awareness in a standard so to adopt it? Okay, so I don't know if Toby and Jim have got anything to add to this, but in terms of anything they're aware from the NQI, from any perspectives they've heard from NQI partners.
Happy to pick this one up, but obviously I don't pretend to have any authority to speak on the behalf of other organizations, but I do think that there is a willingness to from NQI partners in the round to engage as effectively as possible with the community of smaller firms, innovators. Obviously, there are some certain structural challenges, the investment and the resource commitment that smaller firms would need to make in order to effectively participate. But I think it would be very interesting if, in our collaboration with the NQI partners, we could think about what could be good ways to reach out proactively into these communities for example, leveraging the excellent catapults network that we have to reach into these communities of stakeholders that may traditionally struggle a bit more to get engaged in these processes. So I think that's something to think about for us in cooperation with the NQI partners.
Good, thank you.
Sorry, Gavin. I think I would add on that as well. I think that's right, the way that Toby's summarised that. But I think that again, our close work with regulators is a key route for us, as I explained, to hear from them in terms of their engagement with businesses. And then, of course, we work closely in BRE with at higher levels with business representative organisations as well, so we can try and pick up on the views of SMEs via those particular routes.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to next question. So what is the biggest barriers is getting many relevant stakeholders involved as possible in the development of standards? So I'll give a sort of one perspective on that. So I guess one thing we've heard from some of the stakeholders we've spoken to, it depends on the types of standards, really. Obviously, international standards, then often kind of those meetings may be held in in lots of different locations. I guess if one thing is the pandemic has done is made it slightly more easier to get involved in some ways. So I've been able to attend some standards committee meetings a bit easier because they're all being held virtually. So that's one benefit. If you're a member of the committee, but obviously knowing, being able to get involved in the development, yeah, we have heard that as a challenge in terms of resource for getting involved, and sometimes not knowing kind of how to, or can be a challenge that we've heard from others. I don't know if obviously this is a theme that that NQI are looking at, so I don't know if there's anything to add from Toby, hopefully, or Jim to this question. Okay, Toby, Jim, anything to add? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, from my view, I think the barrier is just it's an educational point, really. I think it touches on some of the presentation that you gave earlier, Gavin, around, you know, what's the knowledge base like. I think that it's by reaching out, essentially, that I'm not in our engagement, in our particular distinctive piece of work, I'm not recognising too many barriers at all. What I am recognising is that the more that we lead on our particular workshops and we look to engage with partners and external bodies, the more we discover that others are interested. And so, if you like, there's an ever expanding pool of relevant stakeholders. So I think that it's not so much the barriers themselves, it's knowing who's interested, who has knowledge, and who can contribute to the work that we're trying to progress.
Yeah, good. I mean, there's many ways you can contribute. There's kind of commenting on consultations that might come out, and the ability to do that. I mean, there's many different kind of ways of doing it that different standards organizations use. You know, things like the W3C have kind of quite a different approach. In it's a more community driven process rather than a sort of centralized committee. So there are some sort of different models. So I think that's quite an interesting one. Around kind of how some of these different models work for getting feedback and taking part. So yeah, but I think I agree. It's a lot of it is knowing who to take is interested. Next question, one for us. So from Peter. Hi, Peter. For CPC, are you working with BSI on your research? Very good question. So yes, we've been talking to BSI. But just to kind of stress is that we are focusing obviously on lots of different elements of standards. So kind of not just kind of national standards, but local standards communities. So we're we've been having chats, and we're certainly kind of very open to talking with standards organizations. It's part of it, you know, it's why we're doing this. It's to engage with those involved in the standards development, so we can work on this together. So yeah. And the next kind of one, so it's a really interesting question. So how much influence do you think standards will have on people's lives in the medium-term future? It's a great question. And so we've been doing some work at the Catapult on our topic of post-pandemic places, and looking at how places, what is the future, and kind of how might they be impacted. And certainly, I think there's been a huge amount of increased focus on improving well-being. Obviously, well-being is a huge issue. So I perhaps see that there may be an increased focus on that. You know, there's been a lot of work, you know, looking at well-being in your home. What is the home of the future, and how can homes be more adapted and buildings to be to suitable, and also in the public realm. So I guess that's kind of a potential area for where standards could have an influence on people's lives, perhaps. So that's one area. I don't know if anyone else has got any perspectives they'd like to add. Moving on to another question. So practically, how can innovation occur with ethical and sustainable consideration through use of standards? Great. So There are. I mean, we have been kind of looking at talking to some SMEs around this about how they kind of use standards to sort of demonstrate kind of ethics. And there's some great kind of ethical frameworks out there. So the government have got the data ethics framework, which has been recently updated, which talks about things like being transparent in the way you work. So that's kind of a key thing, is transparent about sort of decisions that are made. And there's lots of talk about how you can make your code transparent and open, which poses a whole load of other challenges, I think. And we could have a big sort of a whole session on this topic, I think. But I think setting principles for kind of how to work ethically with innovate. So use of data is a key one. AI always gets a lot of attention in this area, and so sort of ethical principles are important. So around transparency. Next, another question from BRE. So from Simon Hicks. So from the digital side, I have a lot of experience in standards. So chairman at ETSI, DCMS. Most of the standards organizations are international. So how are BRE building into this work? Digital underpinned industry activity, mobile phones, the internet. Good question. So Toby and Jim, if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, happy to first go at this one, and I hope everyone can hear me all right. I've been told that my connection was terrible a few moments ago. So I think this is really a very important question. I think we're not going to be successful in this if we only look at standards for innovative emerging tech areas from a domestic perspective. It has to look at what are the alliances, what are the key international levers that we need to use to feed in our thinking and project our views on what standards, including on digital, should look like. I think in the context of our work together with BSI and the other NQI partners, we've identified a number of avenues to ensure there is better join up between the views that or the strategic priorities that government has set itself in the international space, and to communicate those in a clear way to the NQI partners and identify opportunities where there's opportunity for join up and achieving a better alignment. And I think that obviously one thing to mention in this context is providing a better link into the regulatory diplomacy program, which obviously looks to achieve a better join up across government, but also using that as a way to link up with the NQI partners. Another piece of work that we're looking at, where we're looking to bring the NQI a bit closer into the fold, is our work on international regulatory cooperation, which is currently emerging, where we will establish specific groups, coordination groups that will include different stakeholders, domestic stakeholders, to coordinate on international engagement activities that sit in the regulation space, but that could also extend into standards and other NQI outputs. And last but not least, I think it's also about raising the awareness again with those that develop policy with an international angle to it, that they are aware of the levers that are potentially at our disposal via the NQI through that network, that they have the engagement in their international or regional umbrella organizations and the bilateral partnerships they have. And there we're, for example, looking at feeding through information on through the diplomatic networks and including this in a high-level script for diplomats in post to raise the awareness of the NQI. So I think there are different strands where we try to raise the profile and ensure there is this join up. I think the one thing that I would add in that context is, obviously, as I was saying at the beginning, the scope of our work is very much along the lines of the formal world of standardization. So we're looking at how can we work better together with BSI and the other NQI bodies. But I'm conscious that obviously there's a wider world of standards that are being developed in in other organizations, where we just need to be conscious that we may need to look at them through a different lens. And I don't think that is something that we're currently in the scope of our project covering. Certainly thinking about digital, because you were mentioning that, Simon, but really helpful comment. Hope that answered the question to some degree, but otherwise very happy to pick it up offline as well.
Very good. So we're almost out of time. We've got a couple of questions if people are happy to stay for a moment longer. And just to kind of add something as well on the international side. So, for example, the Standards Library, we did some work with ETSI. So we did a workshop when we was at ETSI, part of IoT Week, with some of the members of ETSI. And we've also engaging with the Smart City Systems Committee from the IEC on this work, and also we're as founding members of the Global Smart Cities Alliance, which was set up by the G20 through the World Economic Forum. We have a standards group from representatives from the International Telecommunications Union and various other partners that we're sort of sharing some of the research that we're doing from our side as well. So I guess we can kind of help with that. Question from Dan. So if you find questions talking about economic, social, and environmental impacts earlier on, how much emphasis we place on these elements in conversations we've been having. Only use them to make impact. Yeah, so we are certainly exploring what are the benefits that users have found when they've used standards, and often I think the answers some we're getting so far is often on a personal side. So it's often how it's impacted them and like doing their jobs. So that's kind of come into it. But yeah, certainly those kind of topics are coming up. So certainly we can listen out for economic, societal, environmental impacts that are coming out from those conversations. We're continuing that impact assessment work. So yeah, absolutely, it's good to pick up on those issues further. Good question. Another question, so from Jill Jackson, what about the discoverability of standards? There are issues about how people find out whether they should use a standard. So yeah, definitely true. We kind of what sort of stimulated us doing that the prototype for the standards library. It's an issue that comes up quite a lot. How do you know? Often it's through word of mouth. Often it's sort of accumulated knowledge that people will acquire from either from their network or from their experience. So yeah, how can you make them more discoverable? I don't know if Toby, if that's come up in your work as a theme, but yeah, it's definitely one that comes up a lot. And just a few final other questions. So more kind of, well, just before we wrap up. So Dan has raised that in regards to responsible innovation, a standard that may be